At 8:17 on a Monday morning, the mailroom clerk stood outside the company's glass-walled boardroom while 6 executives laughed at the box in his hands. For 7 years, they had called him invisible, joked about his cheap uniform, and treated him like someone who existed only to carry their packages. But that morning, something was different. He wasn't carrying mail to the boardroom. He was walking inside it. And when the chairman stood up and announced, "Everyone, please welcome our new CEO," every person in the room suddenly realized they had been humiliating the one man who knew more about their company than they ever imagined. If you believe people deserve kindness, second chances, and respect no matter what job they have, take a moment to like this story, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this. For 7 years, Daniel Carter had worn the same dark blue mailroom uniform at Westbridge Technologies, one of the most respected companies in the city. Every morning before sunrise, he arrived through the employee entrance, unlocked the mailroom, sorted hundreds of envelopes, delivered confidential documents, and carried packages from one floor to another. He knew every hallway, every department, every executive assistant, and almost every employee by name. But very few people knew anything about him. They didn't know that Daniel had once studied business management. They didn't know that he had graduated near the top of his class. They didn't know that after his father died unexpectedly, Daniel had put his own career dreams aside to care for his widowed mother and younger sister. When money became tight, he accepted the first stable job he could find. The mailroom was supposed to be temporary. Somehow, 7 years passed. The executives never bothered to learn his story. To them, Daniel was simply the man who delivered coffee supplies, moved boxes, and signed for packages. Some employees were kind, but others treated him like furniture. A senior manager once snapped his fingers at Daniel because a package was 3 minutes late. Another executive deliberately left a stack of heavy boxes outside his office and laughed when Daniel struggled to carry them. At company parties, Daniel was expected to serve himself after everyone else had eaten. Sometimes people joked that he had probably been born to work in a mailroom. Daniel heard every insult, but he rarely answered. He simply smiled, finished his work, and went home. What nobody noticed was what Daniel did after work. Almost every night, he stayed awake studying. He read financial reports, learned about corporate strategy, studied leadership, and took online courses in business analytics. He couldn't afford an expensive MBA, so he taught himself everything he could. More importantly, he watched the company. For 7 years, he noticed things the executives ignored. He saw which clients were unhappy. He noticed which suppliers were overcharging. He recognized repeated mistakes in shipping, inventory, and internal communication. He quietly kept notes, not to expose anyone, but because he believed that if he ever got the opportunity, he could help make the company better. Then came the morning everything changed. Westbridge Technologies had lost one of its biggest clients. Its stock had fallen sharply, several departments were facing layoffs, and the board was desperately searching for a solution. A confidential strategy meeting was scheduled for that morning. Daniel was delivering documents outside the boardroom when he overheard 2 executives blaming each other for the company's problems. One accused the sales department. Another blamed operations. The chairman looked exhausted. Daniel placed the documents on the table and quietly left. But before returning to the mailroom, he noticed something on one of the reports. A number didn't look right. He checked it again. Then he checked another report. Within minutes, he realized the company had been losing millions because of a hidden pattern in its supply contracts. Several executives had overlooked it for years because they were focused on larger, more obvious problems. Daniel immediately reported what he had found to the chairman's assistant. She almost dismissed him, assuming the mailroom clerk had misunderstood a financial document. But Daniel calmly explained the numbers. His explanation was so precise that she decided to take it to the chairman. An emergency investigation began. By the end of the day, Daniel's discovery had exposed a serious financial weakness that could have pushed the company into even deeper trouble. The board was stunned. They asked who had discovered it. When they heard Daniel's name, some executives laughed in disbelief. They couldn't understand how the men who delivered their mail had found something their highly paid consultants had missed. But the chairman didn't laugh. Instead, he asked Daniel to come into his office. That meeting lasted nearly 3 hours. Daniel explained everything he had observed during his 7 years at Westbridge. He didn't insult anyone. He didn't seek revenge. He simply described what was happening from the ground level: the delayed shipments, unhappy customers, inefficient procedures, wasted money, and employees who were afraid to tell management the truth. The chairman listened carefully. A week later, the board announced a major leadership restructuring. The company's current CEO resigned, several executives were removed, and an independent search began for a new leader. Daniel returned to the mailroom, believing his part in the story was finished. Then, one Friday afternoon, an envelope arrived with his name on it. Daniel opened it with trembling hands. It was an invitation to the boardroom. He walked into the same room where executives had once laughed at his uniform. The same people who had ignored him were sitting around the polished table, looking confused and nervous. Daniel stood quietly near the door. Then the chairman rose. He announced that after reviewing Daniel's experience, his business knowledge, his understanding of the company, and his leadership potential, the board had unanimously appointed him as the new chief executive officer of Westbridge Technologies. Silence filled the room. The executive who had once snapped his fingers at Daniel stared at the floor. The manager who had mocked his uniform couldn't look him in the eyes. The woman who had once joked that Daniel would never leave the mailroom sat frozen in her chair. Daniel looked around the room, but there was no anger in his eyes. He remembered every insult, every laugh, every time someone had made him feel small. But instead of humiliating them back, he simply said that the company did not need revenge. It needed change. His first decision as CEO shocked everyone. He didn't fire the people who had treated him badly. Instead, he created a new company policy requiring every executive to spend time working alongside employees from different departments. He wanted leaders to understand the people whose work kept the company alive. He also established an internal education program for employees who wanted to advance but couldn't afford expensive training. Months passed, and Westbridge began to recover. Employees felt heard. Customer satisfaction improved. Waste was reduced. Profits returned. But Daniel never forgot where he came from. One evening, long after everyone had gone home, Daniel walked down to the mailroom. His old uniform was still hanging inside his locker. He touched it gently and smiled. That uniform had once represented everything people thought he could never become. To Daniel, it represented something else. It reminded him that his value had never depended on his job title. He had been a CEO long before anyone gave him the title. He had simply needed someone to see it. And perhaps that was the greatest lesson of all: never judge someone's future by the position they hold today. The person you overlook may be the very person who changes everything tomorrow. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who deserves to hear this message, and subscribe for more emotional stories about courage, kindness, and second chances. Before we end, comment, never judge a person by their job, if you believe every hard-working person deserves respect. Because sometimes, the quietest person in the room isn't powerless. Sometimes, they're simply waiting for their moment to stand up. And when that moment finally comes, everyone who once looked down on them may have no choice but to look up.